Hello. We are in session two review. We're going to go through some practice questions today. So at this point, you should have made a copy of this slideshow and used the review sheets on the Biology Keystone exam website to find the answers to the practice questions. So there's our Biology Keystone exam website, and here's the chemical basis of life. That's the review. Those are the review sheets where you'll find all of the answers that you'll need to take care of. You should realize we are in session two, and the main ideas in session two have to do with the stuff we learned in unit two, the unique properties of water and how they support life on Earth. You need to be able to explain how it's less dense as a solid, how it has a high specific heat, the properties of adhesion and cohesion, and how they relate to surface tension and capillary action. And all of this stems from the polarity of the water molecule. So be good and comfortable with that information. And then our carbon-based macromolecules are carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. And then finally, how enzymes are biological catalysts. You should have watched these videos with this dude going over some water properties, our favorite sisters talking about enzymes, and then finally the two videos about the carbon-based macromolecules. The one was constructed by me, and the other one I found on the internet. You could pick whichever one you wanted to watch. You should have already completed these three review questions that have to do with the main ideas. Today, we are looking at the sample questions. Sample question number one: which property of water is most, I'm looking for my paper copy. Here we go. Which property of water is most responsible for plants being able to transport water from their roots to their leaves? Is it the attraction between molecules? What just happened? It's taking very long. The attraction between molecules, a capacity to dissolve many substances, the ability to form low density crystalline structures when frozen, or a capacity to absorb large amounts of energy as temperature increases. Take a minute to answer this question in the Ed puzzle. Looking at the answer, the correct answer was A, and this was a good one. 68% of students in Pennsylvania who took this exam got this correct. So what you really want to pay attention to is the word most here. This is another way that Keystone questions try to trick you. When we're looking at water, you can read most of these are properties of water. They have attraction between their molecules. Yes. They can dissolve many substances. Yes. It's the universal solvent. They can form low density crystalline structures when frozen. Yes. It's less dense as a solid. And they can absorb large amounts of energy as temperature increases. Yes. All of these are properties of water. But which property of water has to do with plants being able to transport water from roots to leaves? And that's the transpiration cohesion mechanism that takes place because of adhesion and cohesion, which has everything to do with the attraction between the hydrogen bonds. So that is the most correct answer to that question. Don't get tricked. Don't get fooled. Okay. The element, did I just open this on the answer key page? Yeah, let me go back. The element carbon has multiple bonding patterns. Which bonding pattern cannot be formed by carbon? So looking at these different bonding patterns for carbon molecules, which one could not happen? Which one could not be formed by carbon? And this is a tough one because it's one of those little minuscule details of carbon that you kind of needed to remember. But the correct answer is D. So first of all, carbon can, for letter A, that could work because carbon can form single bonds with other carbon atoms. B could work. Carbon can form single bonds with two carbon atoms. C could work because carbon can form two double bonds with two other carbon atoms. But carbon only has four valence electrons, and the pattern shown above would mean this guy in the middle needs to have six valence electrons. So that is the one that could not happen. So D would be the correct answer for that because that is a bonding pattern of carbon that could not exist. Looking at number 3, which process best describes the assembly of proteins from amino acids? So think about the central dogma, okay? Your amino acids are your monomers of proteins. They're the one Lego. The protein is the Lego castle. So atoms are linked to form a compound. Monomers are linked to form a polymer. Atoms are added to a monomer until it becomes a polymer, or molecules are added to a compound until it becomes a monomer. Take a second to think about this question. Okay, let's look at the answer together and talk about why certain answers were not correct. Atoms are linked to form a compound does not apply to this question, proteins from amino acids. Monomers are linked to form polymers. I feel good about this one, but let's look at the rest of them. Atoms are added to a monomer until it becomes a polymer. That's not how it works. Molecules are added to a compound until it becomes a monomer. That's definitely just kind of something made up. So the best answer here, the best choice here would be that monomers, that singular Lego, are linked together to form a polymer, the Lego castle. And in this case, the monomer is the amino acid and the polymer is the protein. Let's take a look at number 4. Which statement best compares a carbohydrate and a nucleic acid? The sequence of monomers in a carbohydrate stores genetic information, and the bonds in a nucleic acid store energy. The bonds in a carbohydrate store energy, and the sequence of nucleotides in a nucleic acid stores genetic information. A carbohydrate has a unique structure to assist diffusion across a plasma membrane, and a nucleic acid has a unique structure to assist chemical reactions. A carbohydrate has a unique structure to assist chemical reactions, and a nucleic acid has a unique structure to assist diffusion across a plasma membrane. How many times, guys, did I tell you vocabulary is so important in biology? We wouldn't be able to get through this without a strong working knowledge of our vocab. Let's take a second to answer this on your Ed puzzle. All right. Letter A is incorrect. The sequence of monomers in a carbohydrate stores genetic information. No, because we know that carbohydrates store energy and nucleic acids like DNA and RNA store your genetic information. So this is kind of mixed up. This is backwards. You would switch nucleic acid with carbohydrates. So that's not correct. B, the bonds in a carbohydrate store energy. The sequence of nucleotides in a nucleic acid stores genetic information. That feels right to me, but let's take a look at letter C. A carbohydrate has a unique structure to assist diffusion across a plasma membrane. I think what they're thinking about here is protein channels, not carbohydrates, help move materials across the membrane. And then a nucleic acid has a unique structure to assist in chemical reactions. And I think what they're talking about there is enzymes. So that's not referring to carbohydrates or nucleic acids. And then carbohydrate with that's an enzyme, nucleic acid with diffusion, those are proteins. So C and D are not referring to carbohydrates and nucleic acids. Letter A has these two terms mixed up. Letter B is the correct answer. So hopefully you got that one right. That was a tough one that required a really strong working knowledge of that carbon compounds table that we've gone over at least 6 times now between the study guide and how many times we did it in class, and then for the review you just did, and the short answer question. We've gone through the carbon compounds table so many times, and that is why questions like that. Looking at number 5. Each cell of the human body contains thousands of different enzymes responsible for regulating reactions within the cell. Which statement explains why a single enzyme is unable to regulate a variety of reactions? Okay, so we have to think about the rules for enzymes. Remember, I said that enzymes are just like the keys to your house. My keys can't open my neighbor's front door. My keys can be destroyed. I could melt them down in molten lava or sulfuric acid. My keys' shape determines their function, like the little tiny diary key that you got back at Scholastic Book Fair. That's not opening a car door, right? The shape determines its function, and it's reusable. I can get into my house over and over again with my house keys. So those 4 features of house keys are just like the 4 features of enzymes. So remember what enzymes do. They speed up reactions, they act as a catalyst, and they are reusable, and they are unique. A certain enzyme works with a certain substrate. So this question is asking us why you can't have one enzyme in charge of a whole bunch of reactions. That's the question. Lots of words here trying to confuse us, but at the end of the day, the question says, why can't one enzyme regulate a variety of reactions? Think about your house keys. Why can't my house key open a whole bunch of houses on my block? All right, the binding of a product and an enzyme is specific. Okay, the binding of a substrate and an enzyme is specific. The enzyme is consumed by the products of the reactions, or the enzyme is consumed by the substrate of the reactions. Think about this one for a second. Think about the one that makes the most sense to you. Answer the question in your Ed puzzle. Okay, so for number 5, we know that enzymes and products don't bind together. So I'm going to say A is not the correct answer. We know that enzymes and substrates do. It's the enzyme substrate complex. It's the lock and key mechanism. So that feels right to me because it's specific, which means it only works for one specific substrate, just like your key only works for one specific lock. The enzyme is consumed. We know that's not true. The enzyme is consumed. We know that is not true. So I would be picking letter B as the most correct answer. And again, this is really hard stuff, guys. Lots of vocabulary here. Take your time, eliminate choices. You got this. You got this. Number 6. Trees are typically able to transport water from their roots to their stems and leaves. Which statement describes the property of water that most supports the transportation of water to all parts of the tree? Water forms crystalline structures when it freezes. Water dissolves fewer substances than any other liquid. Water has strong attractions to itself and many other molecules. Water can absorb large amounts of energy with minimal temperature change. Okay, let's take a minute to answer this in your Ed puzzle. I feel like this was an easy one, and evidently so did everybody else in the state because 72% of students in Pennsylvania got this answer correct. That's a lot. One, these are all properties of water. But again, they're trying to trick you. They're giving you all statements that are true, but it's not just good enough to be true. It's got to apply to the question. And the question's asking, how does it get the water to the stems and leaves? Again, that's the transpiration cohesion mechanism. So water forms a crystalline structure when it freezes. This is true. Water dissolves actually, this is not a true statement. Water dissolves more substances than any other liquid. It's the universal solvent. Water has strong attraction to itself and many other molecules, true. And water can absorb large amounts of energy with minimal temperature change, also true. Which one has to do with transpiration cohesion? That's letter C. The attraction allows water to adhere to the inside of tubes within the tree's tissues and move against the force of gravity to all parts of the tree. 7. Which biological molecules are most likely represented by molecules 1 and 2? Molecule number 1 is a molecule made mostly of carbon with 2 nonpolar chains and a polar head. It is a component of the plasma membrane. Molecule number 2 is a polar molecule made of repeating units of sugar bonded to a phosphate, a nitrogenous base, and it stores genetic information. Okay, so you've got lipid or nucleic acid, lipid or protein, carbohydrate or nucleic acid, or carbohydrate and protein. Take a second, answer that on the Ed puzzle. Okay, so again, that carbon compounds table, review it again if you're not sure about this. But remember, we thank our lipids. Every time we get a shower, we don't just dissolve down the drain because our lipids are part of our phospholipid bilayer, which is part of our biological membranes, which makes us kind of waterproof, right? So lipids are part of the plasma membrane. And then we also know that our nucleic acids have those nitrogenous bases, adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine. So when you see the word nitrogenous base, you see sugar phosphate backbone, you see genetic information, and you're going to be like, that's referring to something related to DNA. And that makes me think of nucleic acid. So letter A is definitely the most appropriate answer. Just kind of ruling out the other ones. I'm reading through them. No, 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 no. Okay. Sadly, only 48% of students got this one correct. That was a little surprising to me. You're going to get this one correct because you're going to study your carbon compound table if you are still not crystal clear on that. Number 8, which action must occur for an enzyme to catalyze a chemical reaction? So remember, enzymes are biological catalysts. The word catalyst refers to something that speeds something up. So I gave the example of my fire pit. You know, if I've got my fire pit burning with a couple logs in there, take about 2 hours for it to all burn down. If I add lighter fluid or gasoline into the fire pit, those same 2 logs are just going to take like half an hour to burn down because the chemical reaction has been sped up. The lighter fluid acted as a catalyst. So What action must occur for an enzyme to catalyze a chemical reaction? How do we get our enzymes to start working like that lighter fluid? A competitive inhibitor must first bind to an active site. A substrate must bind to an active site of the enzyme. A substrate must bind to an allosteric site of an enzyme, or a non competitive inhibitor must first bind to an active site. Think about this for a second. Answer it in your Ed puzzle. It's a tough one, guys. Correct answer time. So here's how you're going to apply this. We didn't talk about competitive inhibitors and we didn't talk about allosteric sites. This is a pretty advanced terminology for enzymes. So a competitive, what we do know though, is that your enzyme substrate complex is just like your house and keys. The enzyme is the lock, the substrate is the enzyme is the key and the substrate is a lock. So you see this, and this is something that's familiar to you, and you know that that has to happen for the enzymes to start working. So I'm going to eliminate A, I'm going to eliminate C, and I'm going to eliminate D, because I know that enzymes and substrates join together like a lock and key to make the enzyme work. And when an enzyme's working, it's acting as a biological catalyst or speeding up a chemical reaction. That's a tough one. You take your time, you eliminate choices, you rule things out that you're like, I've never heard that word before, and you take your best guess at that point, but rule things out. Number 8, number 9. The opening of the stomata allows water to evaporate from inside the leaf in a process known as transpiration. As this occurs, water molecules cling to one another and pull water in a continuous stream up the stem of a plant from the roots and leaves. Which property of water makes this movement possible? I really feel like we've had this question 3 different times now, 3 different ways, but you've got cohesion, freezing point, high specific heat, or temperature dependent density. Take a minute to answer this in your Ed puzzle. And the most correct answer here is going to be A, cohesion adhesion, part of the transpiration cohesion mechanism that pulls and pushes the water through the xylem and the phloem up through the tree against the forces of gravity that lets it come out as transpiration. And when you see the word transpiration, think perspiration. We sweat. That's perspiration. Trees transpire. That's transpiration. A is the most correct answer, and I feel like you knew that one pretty well. Okay, let's take a look at the short answer question for this session. We are looking at 4 different organic molecules here. This is a dipeptide. Di means 2. There's our nucleotide, our 5-carbon sugar. It could be deoxyribose, it could be ribose, our phosphate backbone, and then our nitrogenous base. That's either adenine, thymine, guanine, or cytosine. Your triglyceride, which is your glycerol molecule with your 3 fatty acid chains. A diglyceride would just have 1. And then you have your glucose molecule, which is our standard sugar molecule. So our carbohydrate, lipid, nucleic acid, and protein. And we know this is a protein because you see the N, you see the amino group right there. Okay, that means your NH2 is your amino group, and then your N variant is letting you know which amino acid it could be. It could be any of the different amino acids. All right. Describe 2 similarities in the structures of the organic molecules shown. So what do these things all have in common? You're really just kind of thinking about 2 similarities in the structures shown. So come on back here, and what are some things that all of these carbon-based, that's a clue, carbon-based macromolecules have in common? Similarity number one, similarity number two. Part B, structure determines function and is an important concept in biology. Select one of the organic molecules shown and explain how its structure is related to its function. So looking back here, structure function relationship. Think about what it does and how its shape helps that out. All right, think about these for a moment. And also remember, the Keystone exam always makes things more complicated than they have to be. All right, so if for part A you wrote a thorough understanding describing two similarities in the structure shown and how one of them has a structure related to its function, you got a full 3 points on this. Some possible responses that would receive credit, you could say for similarities, they all have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. They all have covalent bonds. They're all branched in some degree. They're all carbon based, or you could say they all have single or double bonds. For part B, you could say glucose has a small size that allows it to pass through the intestines and bloodstream. Glucose is water soluble. Glucose is an energy source. You could say triglycerides have long chains that are a good source of energy. The alkaline end of it is hydrophobic, which is forming a bilayer in plasma membranes. That's what I was going to say. I wasn't going to say it exactly like that, but when you're thinking of a structure function relationship, you could say that with the triglycerides, they're part of the plasma membrane. They provide waterproof coverings for cells because they are non-polar molecules. They don't dissolve in water. The dipeptide is how amino acids are combined to form proteins. And the nucleotide is your deoxy ribonucleic acid, or it could have been your ribonucleic acid. It didn't really say here, but you could say that they are linked together to form DNA and RNA. So that was a really tough one. For more information about this, we could go to the slideshow. Do I not have that linked? I don't have it linked. That's okay. I guess I pasted all the answers in here for this one. All right. One thing I did want to show you guys is if we do go to one of the sample books, which is where I'm pulling these questions from, one of the things you might notice, I've noticed it, if we really do have to just go ahead and take an educated guess, the scoring sampler shows you the distribution of answers. And what I've noticed over the years, let me get to the page. Tra-la-la. Okay, Pamela. I should have had this open already. Okay. You know how they're always like, pick C. don't necessarily pick C. But what I've noticed is it does seem like C and D are usually the least popular. For these multiple choice questions, why won't it? There we go. For these multiple choice questions, 4 were A, 5 were B, 1 was C, and then 3 were D. And then I'll show you, let me see one more. I'll just try to get there faster. I won't scroll. I'll drag down. So what I'm trying to say, I think, is if you really need to guess, like you've eliminated your choices, you've narrowed everything down the best that you can, and you're just like, I really am just stabbing in the dark here. I have no idea. If we look at how these answers have been distributed over the years, I do think that D is the least popular. So if you really, 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 truly have to guess, don't guess D. Okay? Does that make sense? Is that helpful? That's not helpful. That's not good advice, but it's just an observation that I've made. All right. I hope that's helpful. I will talk to you soon.